So I'm going to be speaking on writing and pitching your proposal. And really, the opportunities that we have with COP27, COP27 really gives us an opportunity to be able to tell some critical stories about climate change within the context of China in Africa and China Africa relationships. Um, and really, the last call that was made by the Africa China Reporting Project, I mean, garnered over 100 applications and still has an opportunity. I think the first round has been reviewed and the second round is being reviewed. And so if you haven't received feedback yet, you can wait until that second round is actually reviewed. What we want to do today, though, is to talk about what people are looking for when they are reviewing your proposal, and therefore what the kinds of things that you should consider when you're writing a proposal. Um, First of all, I like to say, and this is absolutely true, as someone who's reviewed proposal applications for Africa China Reporting Project, as well as the International Women's Media Foundation and a whole host of other organizations. Good proposal writing is like writing a good story. Um, you really want your proposal to be targeted to the audience. So it's targeted to the person who's going to be reviewing it and to the organization that is actually giving the grant making. It is well researched. Too often, the proposal includes a request for support in order to do research. But if you haven't done some basic research on the story that you want to be doing, it's really difficult to assess whether or not you do, in fact, have a story that's worth pursuing. A good proposal is written logically. It sets out the problem, it sets out the story that you're considering doing, and then in a very, very logical way explains how you're going to embark on actually developing that story. It's clearly presented. It really does help you to have subheadings. It really does help you to be able in your proposal outline to make sure that people at a glance would be able to see the critical things. And then obviously a good proposal meets deadlines, just like a good story. So we know that the last round of proposal calls for the Africa China Reporting Project got over 100 applications. So you really need to think about the fact that the competition is really very steep. And because of that, you need to start off by making sure you've got the basics right. Read the application requirements, right? Exactly what is the funder asking for? What kind of stories are they asking for? What kind of documentation do they want? What kind of support addenda do they want, etc.? So what often happens is that when there are a lot of applications, the very first way that they reduce the number of applications to consider is by removing all of the people who don't meet the basic requirements, who have not submitted all the documentation, who have not put it into the format that is required, who've not even made it by the right deadline. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that you're not writing it for one person, you're writing it for a panel. A good writer knows that you can never assume the knowledge and understanding of the audience, that your story or your proposal must always include the knowledge, the information that the reader needs in order to make sense of it. You might understand why a particular story is really important in your country. You might understand why a particular story is big news in your country. But if you don't give that context, if you don't explain that to the person or the panel that is reviewing your proposal, it's unlikely they will have the same urgency. You saw that today's presentation, for example, is being attended by people across the African continent and even beyond. So imagine a panel that is reviewing applications from across Africa. They really are looking at stories from different countries, and it's up to you as the person writing the proposal to give them the right context, the right background, and the right analysis. And then tick off, make a list of what the requirements are in the call for proposals, and make sure that you are actually looking at that, and that you are in your written proposal meeting, certainly giving all of those requirements. The Africa-China reporting project requires successful proposals submitted by journalists to be relevant and focused, and to be detailed and thorough. This is not a cut and paste application. This really is to be able to look very clearly at the call for proposals, and make sure, for example, that you are clearly making a proposal that meets the requirement, for example, of climate-focused reporting on how Africa's engagement, how China's engagement in Africa is playing out on the ground in the context of the climate crisis. You have to make sure that your proposal is directly linked to that. When we say relevant and focused, right, it means that it must be broadly aligned to what the Africa-China reporting project is actually calling for. It must be focused on the specific project. It must make use of communities or individuals on the ground to really tell the story of on-the-ground impact and perspectives. We want to see stories that reflect the impact on people in Africa, not theoretical research only, but also really bringing in the human interest detail there as much as possible. What do we mean when we say that proposals for the Africa-China reporting project need to be detailed and thorough? Well, first of all, it really needs to be well organized. You need to clearly organize the information, and you need to outline, right, have a clear focus and outline what your proposal is about. Having a headline at the start that really effectively tells the reader what the investigation is going to do. Having an intro that really explains or highlights the importance of your story in the current situation is really important. And then having a really carefully considered and clear methodology of how your reporting is going to unfold is important. By clear methodology, I mean you really do need to have a feasible plan. So not an unrealistic plan that cannot be achieved within the budget or the time frame. You need to have a feasible, clear plan for how your investigation will be undertaken. Where possible, you need to include specific sources, people that you've already identified for the interviews. You need to be able to outline what kind of interviews you're going to be looking at, right? What you expect to get from different sources. You don't really want to be submitting a proposal to say very vaguely what you're going to do. You want to submit a proposal that lets you stand out amongst the other proposals by showing that you have really thought through the story and that you are ready to go as soon as the funding is agreed. If you can, you should include specific places or areas that you want to visit and say why you want to visit that. If you're asking for travel budget, say why it's important to have that travel in order to achieve what you want to achieve for your story. And where you can, identify even the documentation that you want to be able to achieve. Listening to our speakers today, it is quite clear that there is a whole host of really interesting stories that are still unreported on this theme, whether we're talking about climate impacts, mitigation and adaptation, whether we're talking about energy access, whether we're talking about mineral minings, particularly those related to the global energy transition, whether we're talking about low carbon transportation and electrification. There is a wealth of stories out there that remain untold. Yet very often, the stories that are being put forward in proposals are the same old stories. So when we're looking at the art of writing good proposals, the idea is really key. The questions you ask in order to generate that idea is really key. And so what we really want to be able to do is to have an idea that stands out, an idea that really is unique, is different from what everyone else is going to be given. So step number one to a good proposal is a really good idea. Unusual, different, it's not been done before. Or if it has been done before, you really are proposing to do it differently, and to bring a lot more value to the story that you want to tell. The second thing of writing a good proposal is that you must do your initial research. You must ensure that you show the panel that's reviewing your proposal that there is a feasible story, that you have already invested some time and effort into it, and that the story does in fact exist. Nobody wants to give funding for a story that might actually prove not to be a story at all. The third thing to be looking at is your story plan. Do you have a clear idea of how your reporting is going to unfold, how you might actually tell the story, how you might use social media or multi-platform elements to make the story more compelling and more interesting? And then what is your story focus? Show the reviewer that you are clear and that you are focused about the story guidelines. Then what about making it stand out? Then you want your proposal to be attention grabbing. You want it to stand out. Well, there are 100 proposals. You want to make sure that your proposal actually stands out. You want to make sure that your proposal offers a story that's going to stand out. And so, really, just as you would with a story, have a hook, right? Have a first paragraph or an opening that really hooks the audience. If you can, identify an attention grabbing headline that will make your proposal memorable. Organize your argument in a way that it is very logical, and that the person who's reviewing it has a clear idea of what you want to achieve. Avoid irrelevant information. Too often, proposals have a lot of bump that add lots of words to it, but don't necessarily add a lot of compelling information. So cut it down, just as you would cut down your story to keep it focused. Cut down your proposal to make sure that it focuses on the key things you want. At the same time, though, I don't want your proposal to be too long, but also not to be too short. There needs to be sufficient detail in your proposal to make sure that you have a coherent and persuasive case as to why your proposal should be funded, as to why your story should really be given the funding that will allow you to tell the story. And so let me re-emphasize, please don't send in obvious story ideas, right? Don't send in a story idea that you do every day in your office, that you get up and that you can do without additional funding. If you're asking for specific funding, then make the story worthwhile and tell the donor very specifically why this story is worth funding, why the story is worth looking at. Whether it is the first time the story is going to be done in such depth, the potential impact of the story, the potential impact of the story on discussions, the fact that the story is underreported. You really do need to make sure that you are very clear in terms of why the story needs to be done, what makes this particular story unique as much as possible. When you're doing a proposal, please don't have a shotgun approach. Don't have a proposal template, and every time someone asks for proposals, you send through the same story idea. Be very targeted about what you're asking, right? Make sure that you understand the funders, why the funder is actually requesting particular proposals, what kind of stories the funder is looking for. If you're doing it for the Africa reporting, African and China reporting projects, make sure that you've read through the submission requirements, and make sure that you do a compelling argument. So what don't you want to do? What you don't want to do is to have a proposal that does not show any impact, that doesn't show why the story is important, that doesn't show why your proposed investigation is really important, then don't do a proposal that has no prior research. Do enough research to show that your story is feasible. More importantly, show familiarity with the topic and with the issue at hand so that you can frame it appropriately within your local and even with an African-wide context. Do not send in a proposal that shows you don't know what you're talking about. It's really, really important that you at least understand the language of the issue you're talking about and the key points of the issue. So if you're selling your story, just like you would sell your story to a funder, you also need to sell your story to your news editor. The so what, right? The so what, why should I care, is so important. Show why your story is important, what critical information will be unearthed, and what the potential impact is. Identify your sources, the ones that you've already approached, and the one that you will approach once you get support from the funder. And then strike, when you're writing your proposal and even when you're briefing your editor, strike the right balance between being thorough, but also leaving space for the things that you're going to catch and identify along the way. So let me just wrap up by saying a really good story for a proposal is one that has a relevant topic, is focused, right? Is clearly and concisely laid out, has sufficient supporting information, and has a really detailed plan and methodology for you to actually tackle. You've got a wealth of information from today's session. The potential stories are just so many. With COP27, Africa Climate Week is coming up very soon. And we will begin to focus on the expectations for COP27. By the time people go to Sharm el-Sheikh, the conversation on climate is going to be in full swing. It's a really great opportunity for us to ensure that this year's COP27 is not only based in Africa, but actually has a proper African conversation of the impacts and where we need to go from here. So let me pause there and hand back over to Bongire for the Q&A.